Hey guys, it's Barrett with the Gimme Camper. So we're going to continue our series today on our truck makeover. And what we're going to talk about today is the off-road bumpers that we put on the truck. Now, I've always wanted a set of off-road bumpers. I've always liked winches and things like that. I like the look of the off-road bumper. But there's one problem to off-road bumpers, and if you've ever looked at them, you know what it is without me telling you. It's the price tag. So, you know, a lot of these bumpers can be north of $2,000 for one bumper. In the past, that's always kept me from doing this because of just the price constraints. Now, the last truck that I had and this truck up until I changed, I did have a Weston winch tray mounted to the front bumper. And overall, I really like the Weston winch tray. I've been happy with it. It was a pain to get in, especially on this truck, just because of the angle that you had to tighten those bolts, because it mounts to where the factory tow hooks were. But I will say that I liked the Weston winch tray. I had two of the anchor points for the front, and I had the winch mounted on there, and I did have somebody tack weld that in so that it wasn't able to be took off very easily at all. That being said, when I started thinking about like changing the truck up here, and I started thinking about the Raptor liner paint job that I wanted to do, I started thinking I'd really like to have an off-road bumper. You know, I've been in the middle of working on a bunch of stuff, so I just finished the 4Runner. I was still working on the Honda and doing the paint job for that for my wife, which was also before my daughter wrecked the car 2 months afterwards, which now has me working on it all over again and starting from a lot worse point. It's a great thing. Don't get me started. She's okay, thankfully. That's the biggest thing. But all in all, I was looking for different items on Facebook Marketplace to try to save some money. So some things that I got off of Marketplace for the truck. I got the wheels. They were new, but they were on sale on Facebook Marketplace. I got the toolbox out of the bed off of Marketplace, and I scored the bumpers off of Marketplace. Now these bumpers, number one, I'll say that the front bumper is the bumper that when I looked before, I always wanted this bumper. It's made by Hammerhead Armor, and it's called the Pre-Runner. It has the little bull bar out there. I like the ones that have the winch tray built in and the bull bar. I don't really like the full like grill guard setup. And so this one was exactly what I was looking for. Now I will say that I bought it at a truck center called Cartersville Trucks in Cartersville, Georgia. And the owner there does post some of this stuff on Marketplace, but you can also give them a call and they will tell you if they have anything in stock to fit your truck. They seem to have a lot of bumpers and stuff, and so it's somewhere that I do recommend checking with if you're interested. Now I will say that this front bumper, you know, I forgot what he asked for it initially. I think it was like $1,200, and that sounds like a lot for a bumper, but it was, I think, a little less than half of the cost new. And I really thought it had like some surface rust and stuff on there, but we'll get into that in a minute. And then I also needed one for the back because it was chrome. Well, number one, I didn't really think that I had to change the back. I would like to change the back, but doing everything going from chrome to black, if I was to paint with Raptor liner the back bumper going from chrome, I would have to sandblast it first, so it was a lot of work, which is the same thing that ended up happening with the wheels down the road. So that's why I bought new wheels, so I wouldn't have to sandblast them and stuff. Now, I sent the guy a message and said, I'm really interested in this bumper, and I also saw that you had a ranch hand rear bumper that fits my truck. And I asked him if he'd do both for like $15, and he said yes. Now, number one, I've never really been a big ranch hand fan. I just don't like that treaded look on the bumper. So it's nothing against them, it's just my personal preference. But I was happy because he sent me back a message and said that he had a rear bumper that he said it was made by the same company as the front bumper. It's not. It's a Weston HDX bumper, but it's still a good off-road bumper, and nobody probably know that unless you watch this video and I point it out to you. Now he said he'd do both of those for I think $1,600 is what I ended up paying. So I took a drive down to Cartersville. I actually had my daughter, she had her learner's permit then, had her drive me, you know, hour and a half down the road. We picked those up, and those things are heavy. So that was the first issue, was just getting them loaded in the truck, which they had a couple of people help, and we got them loaded in the truck. So then we got them home, and then they just kind of sat there for a little bit. On my way to get them home, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to unload it by myself, because that front bumper weighs something like 200 pounds. It's a heavy bumper. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get that out of the truck myself. Now I did end up getting it out of my truck myself, and I am very careful of what I do with my back, because I do have a bad back. That's why I'm called the Gimpy Camper after all. But on the way, I decided to stop at Harbor Freight and spend some more money, because they've been draining me all my money ever since I started working on these projects. But I bought a Harbor Freight jack lift table. And so it's like a little cart, but it's got a scissor lift built in, so the whole platform like raises up. And if you ever bought anything heavy at Harbor Freight, like a toolbox or anything, that's what they use to load it in your truck. They put it on, you only have to get it like 6 inches off the floor, slide it up on the cart, and then the platform of the cart raises up to most truck heights. It's like 4 inches under the height of my truck, but up to most truck heights, and then you can just push it right on in and out. So this came in very handy for this project and was worth its weight in gold, as I used it to help install these, which we'll get into in a minute. But in order to get it out, I just raised the table up, and I just kind of drug that bumper out, and then I set it crossways across the cart, and I was able to lower it down to almost ground level, where I could just roll it under my mom's carport and just leave it there for the time being. Now, to go back to the price on these bumpers, I did look up the current price of the Hammerhead Armor front bumper that I have, the pre-runner, and it's $2,289 currently. So I got both of these bumpers for $1,600, and that's a lot of money, but I'm very happy with that purchase. All right, so the next step in the bumpers was to give them some TLC. So like I said, I thought that they actually had some rust, some surface rust on them. And so I took them out. I had the front bumper still on the lift table. So I took it outside and I lifted it up. And then I put the back bumper on some sawhorses. And first step with any TLC is to give it a good washing. That's what we say down here in the South. So I got some dish soap, and I went through and started washing them off. Well, all the stuff that I thought was surface rust, turns out it was just dried clay, because it just came right off. Now these bumpers were faded and they needed a little bit more TLC, which I planned on giving them anyway. Got them all washed off. Didn't have to go over them with any sanding pads or anything like that. I did go over them with a red nylon scuff brush and get everything scuffed up. Now the front bumpers had 4 light pods in them that are rigid light pods, and the housings were in pretty rough shape around the corners on the face of it, but the lights looked good. So what I decided to do was just to tape off the lights and leave all the lights in there as housings. And so I got all those fixed up, and then I removed the back bumper. Had some reverse lights in there that are like 6 inches wide. And it was the same thing, like the housing looked pretty rough. Those lights actually look a little dingy. They could use a little TLC themselves. But I removed the lights so it wouldn't cause me any issue if I decide to change them later. And then I did tape off the lens of those lights, and I sprayed the face separately out of the bumper. So what we ended up doing after we got it clean, we went over everything, scuffed it up, and then I did go over it with some adhesion promoter, because there's a lot of nooks and crannies in those bumpers. And then I went over everything. I did not do epoxy primer on the bumpers. I did do it on the body of the truck, but I didn't on the bumpers, because everything seemed to be in pretty decent shape there. There wasn't any rust or anything like I thought. And so I just went over it, and I did 2 coats of the Raptor liner, just in black, just straight up, same ones you use for the bed of a truck. And then I used a a third dust coat, so from further away just kind of spraying it over. And really it's the same process that I used to paint the truck with, so if you got questions about that, you can check that video out. That'll also be linked in the description. Also, for the bumpers, I did use the standard gun that came with the Raptor liner. So I have, you know, the professional gun, which you can do a lighter texture on, but I just did the full texture on the bumpers as well as the bottom stripe of the truck, and it all matched in. It looks very good as a finished product, I'll go ahead and say that. So immediately after that last dust coat that I was talking about, I went through and removed all the tape, because you're supposed to do that while the Raptor liner's wet. So I just removed all the tape off of the lenses of the lights and the tape that I had around like the wiring harnesses on the back sides of the bumper and all that kind of stuff. As far as putting the rear bumper on, that was a pretty easy install, but I'll say that I had to go to the hardware store down to Home Depot and I had to buy 4 grade 8 bolts. Now these 4 grade 8 bolts with 4 bolts, 8 washers, and 4 nuts. Those 4 bolt sets were $32. It's not even that big of a bolt, so that just kind of made me have a little bit of a heart attack. But what's money when you're working on something like this, because you done spent $50,000 it feels like. So that's just a side note. Anyway, so those 4 bolts just go back on there. This back bumper was very easy to put on as far as that, because it just takes the 4 bolts. I put the 4 bolts on. I did have to go a different route for tag lights because the factory tag lights didn't work here. I just got some cheap ones off of Amazon. Now there's some funky sensors. I think this started in 2016 and my truck is a 2016. Actually, I think it was like halfway through the 2016 year where the truck actually senses the voltage on this stuff and can give you issues if it's not the right voltage. And I'll also go ahead and say that there's very few things that I tied into electronic wise into the factory harness, because I've had issues with that in the past and I wanted to avoid all that. So the only things that I've actually tied into the factory harness were the tag lights and the reverse lights in this bumper. But that's all. Everything else is wired through an aux beam panel, which we'll talk about in a future video. Now, I say that to say that I put these 2 tag lights on, but there is a tag that comes on the dash whenever you turn the lights on that says the tag lights are out, because it senses up that it's a different voltage there. They work fine though, so I'm not really worried about it. And then the reverse lights, I put the bolts back in those, put them back on, and then all I did with that was I took those wires and I wired them into the 9-way plug under the reverse lights. So whenever you put the truck in reverse, the factory reverse lights come on, and then the reverse lights that are auxiliary on the bumper on the back, they come on as well. So all that just happens when you put it in reverse, which is the only reason that it's tied into the factory wiring harness. I also put the sensors back in because it had holes pre-made for the backup sensors. Now this is one of the things on the truck, one of the very few things that I had an issue with that I could never get to work right. Number one, even though those holes were already there and pre-made for the sensors for this truck, I couldn't get the sensors to seat very well. I did get them in, but it obviously wasn't the way that it's supposed to be because it didn't seat down very correctly, but I got them looking fine. Now that same point is, I think it's the passenger side, if you turn those sensors on, it always says that you're about to run into something. So I don't know what the issue is. I made sure the sensors were pointing the correct way, which is an issue that a lot of people have when they put those on. That being said, I just turn the sensors off and I don't use those because it's not that big of a deal for me. And then the only other thing that we did to the back bumper is I did get some green shackles to put on there, and they're powder coated. I got those off of Amazon. I really liked them, so I went ahead and put those on. And they do actually have a cotter pin, so it's a nut and bolt that holds them on, and they have a cotter pin so that the nut won't come off, so you don't have to worry about it working itself loose and come off down the road and hitting somebody or something like that. and that pretty much fixes up the back bumper, at least to that point. The one thing that I did do later on is I drilled a hole and ran an air line through there after I put the onboard air system in. And so I do have an air chuck right by the license plate in that back bumper. I also have one in the front bumper. So I have plenty of places I can get air from to air up tires and stuff like that. So now let's talk about that front bumper. So unlike the back bumper that was really easy to put on, that front bumper was a nightmare. One of the harder things that I've done during this rebuilding stage. I would say the biggest thing that's got on my nerves, the biggest issue that I've had with the truck is actually the onboard air. And that was just from like leaks and stuff, which we'll get into eventually. But as far as actual like hard, can't get it done issue is definitely getting the front bumper in. So the way that we did this, number one, the big issue that you're going to have is lifting it up to the truck, because like I already told you, it's heavy. So I used that lift table, I scooted it out to the very edge of it, and I actually cut a piece of lumber to put under that bull bar to kind of hold it sitting in an upright position. And then I used a piece of rope to go from the bull bar back to the handle of the cart. That way it would hold it in place and couldn't go ahead and tip over one way or the other. So that aspect worked very well. And then I could use the cart to just make adjustments of raising and lowering. Now all that worked fine. The problem was actually installing the bumper. Now number one, before I installed the bumper, I went ahead and put the winch on. I went ahead and mounted my winch. Now my winch, I think it's a 9,500 pound winch. I had it on my other truck. That was my present to myself when I graduated grad school. And so I've had the same winch for a while. It's a Smitty built winch. It's got the synthetic rope. The reason that I bought that winch over a lot of the other ones, if I had to do over again now, I'd probably get the Harbor Freight 12,000, the one with the synthetic rope, just because the price and all the reviews just are stellar on that thing. But this is the one I had, and I wasn't going to go buy another winch because I had a winch. So what we ended up doing is I got the hardware off of the winch, and I just used that same hardware to mount this in. Take that back, 2 of the bolts, I think I had to go to the store and buy a longer bolt because just the way that it mounted took a little bit longer, but that's all. Mounting the winch wasn't so bad. The winch is heavy, which again makes the bumper heavy, but especially in this truck, there's not any way you're going to be able to mount the bumper and then get the winch up there. So if anything ever happens to that winch, I'm still going to be in trouble because I'll have to take this bumper off, and I already told you that's dadgum almost impossible. And the reason it's almost impossible is just from the way that they mount it in there. So they use these bolt clips that have 2 bolts and then a piece of metal that connects them together and goes in from the side, and then a nut on each side. Well, that in itself is not a big issue, and that's not the issue that I had. But the issue is getting those bolt clips in and out. One of the big obstacles, and I was using the instructions that I found from Hammerhead Armor, but you have to get down under the truck and you have to loosen the bolts for the intercooler, and you're supposed to be able to move that around enough for those bolts to come in and out. Number one, none of the bolts to like loosen that are in a good spot either. So everything's really tight in there, and it made me want to scream multiple times. It took me, I think, 2 full days of working to get that bumper on. And it's just insane to me. Anyway, so I finally did get it on there. I also felt like I was pulling on that intercooler more than I should, because they're just like gently lower it down a little bit and it'll work. But I'm telling you, it took me forever to be able to get it on and off. And even after doing it, I don't know that I'd have any easier time doing it now, and I know how it works. I actually tried to take off the tubes that went to the intercooler so I could just go ahead and pull it all the way out, but they're kind of tucked up in there, and I couldn't get these fat hands in there to get them unhooked. So I got it back on there finally, and then after I got everything in there and I got the bolts started, then I went through and tried to do all the gaps where they all worked out real well and looked good. And so I did take, I started tightening one side, and then I moved my little cart table over on the passenger side so I could try to raise it up just a little bit more, like 1/8 of an inch. And I got all those lines to be good enough for me, and I'm really happy with it after it's on there. Now, it took me a little while as far as hooking everything else up. I did go ahead and hook the winch up at that time because it's just like the positive and negative battery cable. But the lights I left off for a while. I did go ahead, the lower set, there's 4 pod lights. The lower set, they had wired in where you could go ahead and just plug it into the factory fog light button. And so I had them wired in like that, but truthfully that didn't work because, I mean, it worked as far as the lights, but they were blinding everybody in front of you because those lights don't like point down because the housing's so big it hits something. So my first thought on that was doing something where I could point them down a little bit more so you could use them as fog lights and not have a big issue because I don't want to blind everybody. But then we were in Texas and I got this bright idea that if I got those lights that are like 6 inches long, similar to the ones that are in the back of the bumper, and I mounted them underneath the bumper, that would be a better fog light. And I didn't feel like it would blind people as easily because you have the thin strips. But those beams of light, they're not really focused, and so it's still blinding, and probably going to do something to change that. But for right now, it's those longer lights, and they work very well for fog, but I only use them if I'm on the interstate in one-way traffic and it's foggy because I don't want to blind everybody on the road. So the way that it's set up now is on my aux beam panel, I have one button that says fog lights, and that's those 2 lower lights. And then I have one that says like bumper lights, and you push that button and all 4 of those rigid lights come on at the same time. So might have a little too much light on the front. I don't really see myself needing all of them at the same time because I have the 4 Harbor Freight lights that are like overly powerful on the roof rack. Then I have the 4 lights in the bumper, and then I have the 2 lights underneath the bumper to use as fog lights too. So all in all, I'm very happy with the way the bumpers turned out. I really like the project, and thanks guys for watching, and be sure to come back next week, see next week's project as well.
Do not forget to hit that subscribe button.